couple minutes after, so we'll get going. Morning, everybody. Y'all are like my typical class. You have basically put yourselves as far apart from each other as possible. We come in, so it's okay. I will let that. So I'm Matt Douglas. I'm associate professor at the Hank Kimmer School of Business. I'm in the management department. My normal teaching is I teach a core class in operations management, so that's like processes and process improvement and how do we make things more efficient. And this semester, for the first time, I'm teaching global supply chain management. So I have been at Baylor now for 7 years, my 8th year. Really hard to believe. Prior to Baylor, we got here in 2018. Prior to Baylor, I had a career in the U.S. Air Force. I was an aircraft maintenance and logistics officer in the Air Force. I don't tell you that as a flex or anything like that, as the kids say. I tell you that because it's very relevant to kind of this journey I've been on for about 7 years, and kind of thinking more about faith integration in business. And the reason I say that is because working in the military, it's a very religious institution. And so when I got here, I started teaching our operations class, and I was teaching our operations class like I would teach it, in the Air Force. And then I started looking around and thinking, the students can get this anywhere. They can get this type of knowledge anywhere. What can I do to help them see the bigger picture and why what they're doing is important, how it can impact lives, and how they can use the knowledge that they have to help communities flourish. And so real quick, just so I get an idea of the room, because I literally brought 2 different presentations. Because the other side of the coin is I'm the assistant director for the Center for Christian Leadership and Ethics. And we have a bunch of different programming. Our flagship program right now is called Christian Leadership in Business. We have about 50 students that we take through the leadership development program, typically based. But we're building out what we call our Baylor Business on Mission program. And so we currently have 4, I hesitate to call them trips. We have 4 efforts, 4 initiatives right now, where we take students basically on mission to, right now we have, I take a team to Guatemala, and we work with doing business consulting for entrepreneurs. We have a team that goes to Zambia that does a skills workshop for college-age Zambians. We have an accounting program that goes to the Netherlands, and they actually help youth with a mission. They apply their skills, they help youth with a mission, prepare for a audit. And then we have a new one in our health management program that's starting up this next year in Tennessee, where they're working with a health fellowship, and they're going to be working on the business end of hospitals. And so, how many of y'all are from like ministry and from a ministry perspective? How many of y'all are here from y'all work for ministry or you're wanting to know a little more about business on mission? Okay, so how many of y'all are tied to Baylor or in student or faculty? Okay, and then how many are business people who are looking at how to apply what you're doing? Okay, great. So I think the current presentation is good for us. So, welcome to everyone else. If you have signed up on the way out, if you would mind signing the sheet, Sarah, make sure I had to tell you all that. So, for those of you who just walked in, I'm Matt Douglas. I'm a I'll start over at the other. So this, there's two times where I felt kind of like I had imposter syndrome. One was about 15 years ago. I went to a Christian Scholars Forum at Baylor. I was not at Baylor at the time. Went to a Christian Scholars Forum, and it was basically kind of a lot of people studying theology and the like, and I was studying business, and so I came to do a business presentation, and it just felt way out of place. The second time, low-key, like today, I kind of feel imposter syndrome, because I know a lot of you all are deep in theology, you have businesses, you have ministries, and the like, and I've literally been on a personal journey over the last 7 years to kind of build out what we're doing right now. And that journey will continue. This isn't finished. Like, this presentation will be different tomorrow than it was today, probably. So today I just want to provide kind of an overview of really how I teach our students to think about business from a faith perspective. I'm going to, in the essence of time, we're going to skip, I normally have a survey that I want you all to go through, but I'll talk through kind of the implications of that survey in a little bit. So go forward twice. So we were taking our Christian leadership students on a field trip, and I won't say where we were, but the CEO of that business basically told us, and very point blank, he said, there are no Christian businesses. What do y'all think about that? You believe there are not Christian businesses?
I believe there are Christian.
There are really Christian businesses. Okay. Got one. There are Christian businesses. Okay. Absolutely. Okay.
I would say from a very technical sense, businesses don't have souls, and so in that sense, you could make that argument.
Okay. Good. Awesome. Anybody else? Thoughts from those of you who say there are Christian businesses? What?
Is there a difference between a Christian business and a business that's run in a Christian?
That's a great question. That's a great question.
We're putting it on the value system, leadership value system.
Awesome. Okay.
The person who's founding it with, a different faith perspective, and currently others founding faith perspectives on business.
The purpose of business is the maximization of the profit. If the soul of that business is to focus on profit and is not the center of the people, you might find some issues.
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
this is just.
Yeah, right? So this is what we wrestle with, right? So we wrestle with these questions. It may seem insignificant, but it's an interesting statement. We often will say there are businesses, and I think you're coming when you said it, run with a Christian focus, run with a set of Christian values and the like. But in the technical sense, businesses don't have a soul, right? So there's no right answer to this. I'm just trying to get the conversation started.
So, on the other hand, some things going on, my son just got back from 7 years running a language school in India. And that language school was established for the purpose of giving jobs to people in India and of sharing the gospel in a way that is not legal, or in a way that can be done without the government interfering. So there is a business, it's a Christian mission disguised as business.
So what I hope today that we can talk through, we're not gonna answer this statement or anything. I just use that to kind of get us talking, get our attention. What I want to impress upon y'all, I think Catalina said it really well, that we're even when I'm teaching Baylor students today, they don't process it, but they're thinking profitably, right? And so we're going to kind of work through a framework that I've been kind of developing It's not my own writing. I've taken a bunch of different writings and put it together in a way that makes sense for me, in a way I present, and I'll be interested in this feedback after. Before though, there's a great book called, and I'll have it up here again, a resource called Why Business Matters to God. It was written by Jeff Van Duzer about 15 years ago. He's still relevant today. He was the dean of the business school at Seattle Pacific University, which also you'll see the video of him next. So I'm going to show you all a quick video because he, way better than I could ever, gives you a really succinct definition. Two things actually. One, kind of talking about the grand narrative of the biblical arc of history and how businesses can basically represent that. And then also he gives a really good definition of the purpose of the business. So really quickly, it's about 5 minutes.
Everybody knows that Scripture is made up of a whole host of different genres, and different writings, letters, prophecies, biographies. I mean, just a whole bunch of different types. And typically, when you hear somebody talk from the Bible, they'll pull one little story out and then amplify that story and draw principles out of it. And there's nothing wrong with that. But we sometimes forget that when you stand back, the Bible tells one big story, and the theologians sometimes call it a grand narrative. And so that was the approach that we decided we would follow. And as we looked at this grand narrative, we thought this could be divided. And again, theologians debate as to how best to divide it up. But we settled on a pretty conventional model: creation, fall, redemption, and new creation. And when we looked at those 4 different sort of movements or chapters of this big story, what we asked was, what could we draw out of each of these chapters that might inform the way we think about business? And so really that's where we ground our theology of business, is in looking at this creation, fall, redemption, new creation pattern as a part of the big story. As I think about the purpose of business, I really have found myself drawn back to the creation chapter of this grand narrative. And if you pull it apart and ask kind of what is it that we learn from there, there's a number of sort of obvious statements that sometimes I think we forget to focus on. One is that human beings were designed, and this is before the fall, so this is in God's perfect design, were designed in part to work. They had other aspects, but at least in part to work. There's a whole series of charges that are given to Adam and Eve in the garden that we sometimes wrap up and call the creation mandate, but they're tasks that they are to perform. And if you think about that work, another feature that comes out of the creation account is that this work was to be done out of relationship. If we are, as individuals, made in the image of God, the image of God himself, itself, is this triune God that lives in this constant relationship. And that's built into the narrative in Genesis 1. And so if we are made in that image, we are made to be in relationship. And more than that, as God models, the work that is done comes out of that relationship and then is intended to return for the benefit of that relationship. That all of God's creative work followed after the relation. The relation pre-existed task. But the task that was done, the creation work, was intended to come back for the glory of God. And the same pattern then gets replicated in human beings. God looks down and sees Adam and says it's not right for Adam to be alone. There needs to be Eve, so that out of that relationship, the two of them could do the work that God's intended for them, and that work could come back for the benefit of the marriage and of the essentially humanity that would flow out of that. So as we looked at this, we said, this is actually right spot on what business does. Business brings people together in a variety of different relationships in ways that will enable them to do meaningful and creative work. And so as a sort of first order purpose, that was one of the things we landed on, is that business exists for the purpose of providing opportunities for individuals to express aspects of their God-given identity in meaningful and creative work. But the other piece that I think is really clear, I say really clear, but in some ways sort of subtly introduced, is the notion that even from the beginning, God intended this perfectly created garden to flourish in part through the work of human beings. That it was and you have to be careful with this word, so I always try to put it in quotes, some partnership between God's activity and the activity of human beings that together were going to bring forth the crops from the land. There's this verse in chapter 2, verse 5 that talks about the land had been created, the fields had been created, but there still weren't any crops. And they said, well, why? And then there's two reasons given. One, God hadn't sent any rain. Okay, that's God's work. But also because as of yet there were no human beings available to work the ground. And the implication is that somehow this combination of God and human work was to take what was perfect, but in a sense perfectly resourced, and cause it to flourish. And out of the ground was to come the crops and the provisions and eventually the innovations and the entrepreneurship, and all of this was to be done in part through the work of human beings. And so as a first order purpose to go along with that other one that I just identified, I would say that business exists for the purpose of bringing goods and services into the world that will enable communities to flourish. So these two purposes. One, business exists for the purpose of providing opportunities for individuals to express aspects of their God-given identities in meaningful and creative work. And it exists to produce goods and services that will enable a community to flourish. And that's my answer to why business matters to God. Its fundamental purpose.
Okay. Yeah, right there. Thanks. So, as you can see from, I had actually a friend introduce me to the book and to this idea of, of the grand narrative and just associated with business, and I just, like, literally right then, a lot of things came together in how I decided, this is the way that I need to teach our students so that they first can understand the big picture, right? Understand why they would make decisions the way they would make decisions versus making those decisions in a vacuum. And so a couple of things here that I'll point out what he said in just a very succinct way. The Bible tells a single story from Genesis to Revelation. It begins with creation, when all things were made good. It moves through the fall, when sin entered and distorted every aspect of creation. It continues through redemption, when Christ entered the world to reconcile all things to himself. And it concludes with, in this case, the consummation or the new creation or restoration. We've seen several words, when God will make all things new. And so business has a role to play in this grand narrative. And so I'll remind you his purpose of business. As stewards of God's creation, business leaders should manage their businesses to provide the community with goods and service that will enable it to flourish, and to provide opportunities for meaningful work that will allow employees to express their God-given creativity. And so we were talking in our Faith and Business Chapel yesterday about these ideas, misshapen vocations that people may take on, but that may not allow communities to flourish, right? And those are things that we would want to move away from. Next slide, please. So really what I took out of all the reading, or a lot of the reading that we've been doing, and we actually have done some writing on this too, is that the first thing is that business is inherently relational. I teach supply chain management, for those of you who weren't here first, but I teach supply chain management. And in supply chain management is inherently relational. You have the relationships are established across entities, across organizations, to bring those products and services to the customers to meet them, right? To allow them to flourish. And so it's inherently relational. And so one way that we can express and do our part in business is to manage these relationships. You're going to see here in a little bit. So the first two, obviously individually focused, our most important relationship is that with God. The other three relationships flow from that. Our relationship with ourselves, we have to acknowledge that we are not God, but we are called to represent His character, obviously knowing that we are fallen. As Jeff said in the video, we're called to be in relation with others, in loving relationship with others. And then finally, we're taught to produce bounty. We're commanded to produce bounty to help the earth flourish, as he mentioned. Interestingly enough, I got this framework not from him. I got that framework from actually working on our missions work that we're doing. And how we operate in a mission sense, our focus is largely relational. How do we maintain long-term relationships with the people that we are working with, the ministries that we're working with, people in the country that we're working with. And so that, again, kind of came out of missions. This is transformational development work. I'm overlapping it from business literature and the like, and kind of bringing it together. And so business as a relational focus represents the creation, right? But, next slide. But we, and so systems are inherently broken. And so we were actually doing some writing. A couple of colleagues of mine and I were doing some writing in this area, and we had we cherry-picked some verses and some parables, and we were making some connections to supply chain management, and we sent the article off. We were very proud of ourselves. We sent the article off to Christian Business Review, and it came back, and we got skewered. Like, nope, this is not good. And so we, after we sold for a while and tried to figure out, we contacted one of our marketing colleagues, Marjorie Cooper, who is true trained. And she came to us and we had a little meeting, and she said, y'all are going out on that. The path is in supply chains or in operational systems, whatever they might be, you're trying to take chaos and turn it into order. And so the fall represents the chaos, right? And then redemption represents the order. And so as fill in the blank, right? Businesses here, we use supply chains, we use operational systems, and the like are developed, managed, and improved. Chaos turns to order. So Morgan in the back was telling us they do some work in natural disaster relief and things like that. Actually, the idea that we really use as a good example is the idea of a natural disaster occurs, right? There's chaos. Slowly but surely, as the supply chain is developed and put into place, what happens? You start slowly but surely, you start to see order appear out of that natural disaster, out of that chaos. And as you continue to manage and improve those systems, you start to see more order. And those systems become, redeemed in a sense. You can flash that. You can argue with me later whether or not that's a good word to use, but we kind of use redeemed or healed, right? These systems are redeemed. And so what we have tried to work towards is a couple of things. And here's a little excerpt from our article. Just as modern medicine is often viewed as an extension of God's healing power, business can be used as a tool to serve the needs of others and glorify God by manifesting attributes of his character, particularly that of creating order out of chaos. According to Spencer, who wrote a book on, it's a theological book on environmental protection, Christ's interactions with nature are in accord with the moral order of creation and are redemptive in nature. The direction of Christ's ministry was redemption from the fall, and thus his example points to positive relationships that seek to embody substantial healing. Thus, we are called to pursue stewardship of businesses that reflects the goal of substantial healing. And so that's where business can come in. But then, I came up with that, and again, that was probably a few years of trying to develop that and really think about it and try to put it into play. But really, I'm teaching business school students who are going to likely go out into a secular business, right? They're not a Christian business. They're going to go out into a secular world, secular workplace. And there's other language. They won't be able to use that language. I just have to be honest. In most cases, they won't be able to use that language. And so, I go, okay, well, how can we overlay some language that's being used right now in the business world to kind of represent these concepts? And so there's this idea of sustainability. Most of the time when we think of business and we say the word sustainability, we're talking about environmental sustainability, but actually the framework has 3 pillars. The actual sustainability framework has an economic pillar, which is the primary, as we've talked about, often considered the primary purpose of business, is to compensate shareholders via a competitive return on investment, right? We all know that from Business 101. But there are also 2 other pillars, one being the social pillar, which means, me just kind of very quickly, I just say, hey, we take care of our employees, and we take care of the community in which we operate. So we're good stewards of our employees, we're good stewards of the community in which we operate. We don't exploit. And then finally, the environmental. What is our impact on the environment around us? How are we utilizing the resources that God gave us? Again, are we stewarding those, or are we exploiting the environment as such? So we have a framework. The problem is we have the flaw too, right? And that framework is often not implemented in a way that that balances all 3 of these pillars, if you will. And so, for example, sustainability in business has largely been considered from what we call an instrumental approach. Does anybody know what that might mean? Like an instrumental approach to sustainability, what that might be? Versus an ethical approach.
What things can be used for.
Exactly. So how can I use environmental sustainability to get more business? So how would I normally do that? I would probably put on the website, right, that, hey, we're doing all these cool initiatives on the environmental side. It may or may not be strategically connected to what I'm doing as a business, right, to help me make profit. But I can go, hey, we're doing all this cool stuff. Come, you eco-conscious people come.
You can actually profit by doing that nowadays. You can actually write off, we use environmentally friendly chemicals in commercial construction.
That's right.
That's right.
And there's
Percentage of tax cuts.
yes. And there's 2 sides to it, right? There's the one side that's, the term's called greenwashing. It means if we say we're doing stuff, but we're really not. And then there's the other side where people are finding out that, hey, if I do this right, if I do this well, I actually am going to make more profit. And I am going to obviously keep the sustainability going. So I do a lot of research in coffee right now, largely because we got connected to coffee conditions. And so there's lots of big coffee companies talking about sustainability, things things like that. And the bottom line is, if you're not environmentally sustainable, like your coffee trees die. I mean, that's essentially it, right? So you've got to do it. Or if you have a sustainable farm, then clearly you're doing things right for the long term. So we took this kind of framework and basically said, okay, how does this represent? So how would this represent our relationships, right? How does this represent our relationships? What were our 4 relationships? God, self, others, and the rest of creation. So how do these pillars connect? Say the social, which relationship? Others, right? And where's the environmental? Rest of creation, right? So now, hey, we got some connection here. That we can give the language of from those other kind of theological frameworks, and now we can overlay that onto a framework that the students are really going to be able to use on the outside, at least on the outside of the college campus for us. Next slide, please. And so actually, there is there's an article that was written about 5 years ago, and by a couple of guys up at it's in Nashville. I'm blanking on it. Starts with an L. University. Lipscomb. Thank you. Lipscomb University. They wrote this article, and so essentially you see this, right? You see our 3 pillars: create value, care for people is kind of how they play that out, and then tend the earth or take care of the planet. And as you see, they've actually created a scorecard. We won't obviously go over the scorecard here, but they have taken that sustainability framework, that 3 pillar that exists, and they've overlaid biblical principles onto each of those. So you can see kind of in some of these, like here, the golden rule for all stakeholders. And when we say stakeholders, that means anybody inside or outside your organization. It could be your customers, it could be suppliers, it could be your employees, it could be anybody really. And then, again, we don't want to forget, like we want a profitable, sustainable business. If I'm not profitable and I go out of business, I'm not providing goods and services to help the community first. So I have to, I don't forget the profit motive, right? I need that to be sustainable long term. I have to have that. And so essentially what we're looking at is, this is kind of a biblical framework, if you will, and then go to the next one. And this is the triple bottom line, which you may have heard of, that's been around for about 25 years. And so you see, same pillars: economic prosperity, social responsibility, environmental stewardship. And interestingly, Steve Elkington, who actually developed this framework so on its 20-year anniversary, so 2019, he said, I want to retract this framework because people are not using it properly. And here's what he said. He expressed his concern as follows. Whereas CEOs, CFOs, and other corporate leaders move heaven and earth to ensure that they hit their profit targets, the same is rarely true of their people and planet targets. Clearly, the triple bottom line has failed to bury the single bottom line paradigm. He subsequently praised B Corps and implored other multinational corporations to follow suit, to be the best in the world and best for the world. And so we do some research. The survey that I sometimes have here at State, we've done some research on trade-offs. I do research in what's called supply chain care. So it goes to the notion that if I, let's just say on my website, I say I have these values, we do these things. We take care of these areas in social and environmental side, or whatever. Do we actually do that in practice? And not only do we do that in practice just in our local organization, but do I require my suppliers to do that? Do I require my customers to abide by these? How far out? Is it just within my four walls, or is it with everybody I'm working with? So we put a scenario in front of managers, all Baylor grads, by the way, all Baylor grads who have graduate degrees, by the way, and we asked them, we deliberately put trade-offs within these pillars. So we traded off, we had two scenarios. We had a trade-off between profit and environmental stewardship, and we had a trade-off between profit and social responsibility. And so what we meant was this idea of, hey, you have a supplier in country X that the laws just changed. They're not following the new law. But they're doing really well, and because they're doing really well, they're very efficient, they're doing well, you're going to benefit from that. You're going to lower costs, and thus you're going to profit from that. Had a couple other different iterations of those types of trade-offs, and gave people these scenarios randomly, had them respond randomly to all the different, and evaluated together, and what do you think happened? What was the primary focus area? Right. And so again, we're not doing this like gotcha or anything like that. We're just showing that even subtly, in these subtle decisions that you make day to day, you're thinking about profit. That's what we. And granted, hey, I guess like it's tough. I'm not saying I'm not trying to come up here and be like, hey, you should all adopt this framework perfectly. No, that's not what we're saying. But awareness to me is like half the battle, right? It's understanding, okay, I get it, yeah, we gotta make a profit, we gotta be sustainable long term and all that. How are we really treating our employees? How are we, who are we getting our stuff from? Like, how are they treating their employees? How are they treating the environment in which they operate? Sometimes you don't know, like past the first tier of the supplier. And so that's what we're trying to tell the students. And so we set the stage for them early in the class so they're not making decisions in a vacuum, right? They can make the trade-off decision. They can make whatever decision they want, but at least they have a good understanding how to make those decisions. And so here's just a couple of cases that we like to use. So next, please. So Nike, does anybody really know how big Nike is? How many employees do y'all think Nike has? Just a guess.
40,000.
How many?
10,000.
40,000, 10,000, not even
Close.
in the same country. What else? Anybody else? Come on.
Million.
Over 1 million people are associated in some way with Nike. There's over 500 facilities that they outsource to make shoes. 1 million plus people. 500 plus facilities. So you can imagine the impact they have in whatever area that they're in, right? And they're all over the world. And so this was taken from a case study. So when we look at this idea of taking kind of chaotic systems and creating order, in my operations class, there's a philosophy, like a management philosophy, called lean thinking. And so lean thinking is this idea of continuous improvement. You're going to make small, incremental efficiency improvements over time. You're going to save a lot of money. You're going to do highly efficient. On the outskirts of that kind of overall continuous improvement focus are other things that are important when you apply this philosophy. And so, Nike's coming off of like some pretty bad press in how people were being treated in their factories and the like. And so they're trying to think like, man, we probably have to make some changes, but they're also wanting to make some efficiency changes. They want to make some improvements and the like in efficiency and obviously reduce their costs a little more. So they said, hey, we're going to do this lean management thing. We're gonna basically test this in some of the factories. And so lean inherently is very disciplined. It's everything, things are standardized. It's disciplined. You have to follow certain rules. You have to be very, very exact in how you use it. And so what happened was they were expecting, and they got, some efficiency improvements. Their suppliers, the factories they were working with, did better, which improved their bottom line. But some unexpected consequences were that because of applying these types of principles, we saw some improvements in the social pillar of that sustainability framework. People got treated better, probably because the bosses were yelling less because they were going better. That's more order. Things are looking better. We have better benefit systems take shape, all these kind of things. So lean was developed by the Japanese after World War II, and having to come out of obviously utter devastation and make these things happen, they put certain things in place, and those principles have stood the test of time. So, for example, in a lean philosophy, you don't fire them. They're basically employees for life, and you figure out how to continue to make them. You're making improvements. So when I was in the military, we would make improvements, and our people were always worried about, like, well, what does this mean? Does this mean we're going to not need as many people, and we're going to have to move, or we're going to have to, you're going to get rid of us, or whatever that might be? No, that's not the case. You improve, so you can move somewhere else, so you can improve, so you can move somewhere else, so you can improve. And it keeps going. So, we apply, again, good management practices, and it allows us to balance those pillars a little more, even unexpectedly in some cases. So that's kind of a tactical example of how we apply kind of this framework and such in business. Next slide, please. Oh, we're doing great. So a more strategic example. We work with a ministry called Serve Hope. They're headquartered in Honduras, and they have an entrepreneurship training program that's headquartered in Guatemala. We actually take our students to Guatemala to work with entrepreneurs because they don't want us to go to Honduras. But through that ministry, we got linked up with a group from Expo Home and the Way. Serve Hope has a number of ministries. One of them is the coffee ministry, where they were selling coffee. They were a coffee company. They were selling coffee, and the profits from that coffee were going to buy water filters to be distributed to families in Honduras and Guatemala to get clean water. The Emprende program, the entrepreneurship training program that they offer. So we were working with them in that capacity. So their Emprende entrepreneurship training program we're also working with, and they have a conference every year, and we met the CEO basically, having kind of been around them and working with them now, they have a really, what I think is a really interesting and meaningful framework for marrying your for-profit business with service. So Expo Home Improvement is their for-profit business. Highly successful renovation company. They do probably like mid-range renovations. So they're not doing the, couple $1 million home renovations or whatever. They're in the tens of thousands range. You're doing a bathroom, or your kitchen, or you're changing, or you're replacing your windows, those kind of things. Heavy focus on quality and community. We want to help communities flourish, right? By blessing them with our product and our renovation. In the building, in the headquarters building, exists this other organization called the Collective Way. The chief, I think he's called the Chief Administrative Officer for Expo Home, leads the Collective Way, which is the connecting organization to all of the nonprofit focus that comes out of Expo Home. One of those nonprofits that they support is Servo, who we work with. It's crazy to me. It's not to me, but like the process is crazy. So they wanted to start. The owners of Expo Home wanted to start a coffee business, which is now Cerulli Coffee House in Farmville, Texas. Guess who now funds the water filters for Servo? Papa Orange. It's up there. It's really good. They took over basically the coffee business of Servo. And so the reason I'm bringing this up is just because it's like a really, really good example to me. Like, we just talk about empirical evidence all the time, like in academia, but it's a really good empirical evidence of alignment. And so if you look at Expo Home, quality and community, Collective Way, activating local businesses to partner on mission for collective impact. And then Cerulean Blue, if you talk to them, it's really like, they call it a coffee house. If you say a cafe, it's like a coffee house. Yeah, why? Because it's a place for community, right? It's a place where people come together. So they
create revenue.
What's
The
that?
coffee place.
Coffee Place is a for-profit entity
Oh, wow, okay.
that then takes a portion of that profit and buys a lot of filters now that used to be, that whole entity used to be run by Servo. And so, and they're all connected, it's the same numbers in all cases. And so you can see community, right? Helping, this idea is purpose of business, helping communities flourish through goods and services. Helping people find meaningful work. Again, it's in there, right? They're helping, in all three cases, they're helping people find meaningful work and impact their life. So it's a good case, really, of, we haven't yet, but my goal is to actually write a case study on, in this space, just to show, like, a business on a mission, there are creative ways to do this. And why do I say this? Because I think what happens is what we see is, as I'm bouncing around, visiting businesses and the like, and again, I'm not disparaging anybody, everybody has good intentions and wants to do right. And so I'm not saying that's not the case, but what I see is a lot of nonprofit type initiatives or service initiatives that are not really tied to the business and the strategy and the mission as a whole, right? And so when you see alignment, then you see energy, right? You see the energy. It's not just this thing that we're doing a couple Saturdays a week, a month, or a couple Saturdays a year. It's embedded. And so Collective Way is embedded. They're in the space. Like they're talking every day, and they're working together every day. So that's why I think it's a really cool kind of more strategic case to show like this is on mission in the local community. So this isn't like taking it to the other nations, but this is like local community. Now they do take the mission to other nations in some of the organizations they support. There's one in India, there's obviously Hunters Guatemala, there's one in Eastern Europe. And so again, they're taking the mission to the nations as well. But they're also helping their own church. So it's a really nice model, I think, for y'all to look at. I think we have time. Yeah, we do. So the next one, please. So this is, has anybody ever heard of I Have a Bean? They're out of Wheaton, Illinois, close to Wheaton College. But this is another, I think, really good kind of strategic way to use your business to serve others, particularly as you see on the social pillar. You'll see, I actually ordered some. I'm a coffee nerd now, so because of all the coffee work we've done, and so I just ordered some I Have a Bean since when I was prepping for this. I'm like, I need to try this. I've watched this video about 1,000 times, and I've never tried their coffee. But you'll see kind of their model, and it's on the social side it's good, and then on the economic side, they're providing a quality product. Right? They're not skimping on cutting corners, they're providing a quality product.
By the time I was 19, I was convicted of attempted murder and first-degree armed robbery and sentenced to life and 100 years in prison. In jail, a guy came to me my first day to give me some underwear and stuff that I didn't have, and I thought he was trying to make a move on me because where I'm from, people don't just give you something for nothing. And so I saw what cell he was and figured that later on that night I'd go kill him. So later that night, I went to his cell and I rushed inside, and he and two other guys were in there having Bible study. So I just kind of stopped, and he handed me a Bible tract about Jesus, and went back to my bunk and sat down, and those guys brought a Bible to me, taught me how to pray, how to read God's word, the importance of fellowship and things like that, and it rocked my world.
Before starting I Have a Bean as a company, before it was an idea, I led a short-term missions trip to Brazil. On that trip, my coffee epiphany happened. I had freshly roasted black coffee, and it was great. Came home from Brazil and started the process of me diving down the rabbit hole of roasting coffee. No plans for a business. That was not on my radar. It was on God's radar, wasn't on my radar. All I was really doing is trying to find great tasting black coffee. And eventually, I got there. Did you see her comment about Java?
No.
Adding that to that?
I greet the people that come through the door. They look at me and they're like, "Where are the convicts?" And I'm like, "Right here." I was incarcerated. And when I came home 6 years ago, I needed a job.
Being in prison and people finding out my offense, would I be hireable? Would somebody want to work with me? Would they trust me? When I did something that wasn't worthy of trust. A week into the job, Pete pulled me into the office, and of course I'm very nervous as to why he wanted to talk to me in the office, but he presented me with a key to the back door, and said, "You're showing up this early, you need a key to get in here to start your day." And I just broke down in tears, because here I am in the first week, and Pete trusted me enough to give me, in air quotes, the keys to the business.
People are released from prison into neighborhoods all across the U.S. Our goal, put roasting plants all over so we can employ locally but on a national level. It gives us the ability to do this key thing. If you place an order today, we roast your coffee today, and you get that coffee today. It all happens today. We've been in several taste competitions against large, local, and national roasters. We've never lost a taste competition. Blind tasting. The coffee we roast needs to be in the top 1% from a quality standpoint. We've got employees that, because they have a label of felon, are seen by society as being in the bottom 1% from a human quality standpoint. But here, they're producing product rated in the top 1%. We're doing that so that the quality of their work will change the perception of the public.
I got an opportunity in about 13 years. The parole board said they were gonna let me go in 2.5 years. And I couldn't believe it. I just started crying and said, "Thank you, Jesus."
Lewis Dooley was our second employee. He was a gangbanger and a drug user and a drug seller and all of those kinds of things. But Lewis has become one of my dear friends because of knowing him as a person in this business.
When I met Pete, I went up to him, introduced myself, say, "I'm an ex-felon, you said you give them jobs. Can I have an application?" And that Friday, I was in the back room roasting coffee. So in less than a week of meeting him, I had a job, my first job.
He doesn't work here anymore, and he is doing the next thing that God has called him to do, that we were instrumental in just being accepting and redemptive and all of those things for Lewis that God was asking us to do. It is the most fun I've ever had. Doing anything is this business. The employees, the coffee roasting, the tasting, the cupping, the coffee shows, all those kind of things, and watching people's lives transform. Fantastic.
When I first came home, I couldn't even look people in the eye. You need to own what you did. As soon as you can do that, that's when you move forward and you say, okay, if you have a problem with me, that's got to be your problem because I'm making a difference.
We are worthy of an opportunity to make a living for ourselves, and certainly an opportunity at redemption.
God used I have a being in so many ways in my life to help me do what I'm doing today. And so it's a joy, you know, I'm humbled and I'm blessed that God would choose me and use me to help him.
Is owning your own business all it's cracked up to be? No way. No way. Would I do anything else? No. I can't imagine doing anything else.
All right, so that video series called Faith and Co. It's from Seattle Pacific University. There are 4 seasons, all different kinds of companies. There's different themes across. This is from the Business on Purpose season 1. Amazing videos if you just need inspiration or thinking about ideas in this space. And so I wouldn't be a good college professor if I didn't provide us takeaways of our chat. So I tried to kind of break it up into like business takeaways and then like industry takeaways. So for businesses, this idea of ownership to stewardship. So in other words, everything that is under our purview, under our responsibility, is not ours, it's God's. And so how are we stewarding what God has put us in charge of? We're in our path, right? This other idea of profit with purpose. Instead of solely focusing on making profit, which likely leads to a lot of short-term decision-making, things like that. What's our purpose? What are our values? What are our values? What is our mission? How are we making decisions that are aligned with those values and that mission? Right? And so I think sometimes you put these things up and people are like this sitting in the audience going, yeah, man, I mean, that's obvious. But I'm telling you, I talk to professionals all the time, especially in my space, supply chain and ops. It is a grind. We call it a meat grinder. It really is. Like, it will chew you up and spit you out the other side. It's fast-paced, it's hard work. And you have to slow down, like think about these other things that are going on, right? And so think holistically about the decision, the implications of the decision you're making. And again, I'm not saying you wouldn't choose profit over, say, social or whatever for a period of time. That's understandable. But just again, think about the long-term implications of it. I tell our students the story of one of my bosses who we used to be, we would be, our metrics are a good way to see what you really believe in, or what you really want, what behavior you really want. So our main metric is called mission capability rate. So how many airplanes were operational? It was usually a percentage. And we had new airplanes, and they were beautiful airplanes, C-130s, and we were sitting at 90, I can't remember how many, I don't remember the percentage, but we had 14 airplanes. We basically had like 2 airplanes, so 80-something, 90%, right? Which was above our required metric on Christmas Eve. We worked on Christmas to get to it. Yeah, in some cases you're like, yeah, sometimes you get pushed, right? We didn't. There was nothing going on in the world that we were going to have to watch the fleet. There was nothing. And so we talked about it, and yeah, we can make people work hard. I'm not saying that's much. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is those decisions, next we're working Easter, then we're working, 4th of July, then we're working, you can only do that for so long. And when your people burn out, you burn out. And it's not sustainable, right? That's the whole point of the word. It doesn't have hardly anything to do with the environment, by the way. It has to do with being able to sustain that energy. So, and then consider those industry partnerships that align with your mission, vision, and values, right? Instead of just picking a day to go, pick up trash, that's good, that might be aligned. Figure out how can you better partner with these ministries, and over the long term too, right? Next, please. And then for ministries, I think I feel like there's this huge space. So what we do right now, we have 3 types of missions that we run out of business school. One we call business consulting services. And essentially what we're doing is we're working with small business entrepreneurs. Some of them it's just them doing their thing out of their house, whatever it might be. But we're providing them with some consulting, if you will, to help them improve the business plan, improve the business, attack a challenge that they've had for a while, whatever it might be. We also do business skills development, which is a workshop that we do in Zambia, where we're basically business 101, like resume writing, professional resume appearance, all those kind of things, and you can do these other things too. And the third we do is business skills application. How can we help your organization? How can I, as a professor, go into a ministry organization and help you So how do I send our students in so that we can do that too? And so my charge to the ministries is to think about, Lord, we build the relationships, we solve some problems, which opens the door to share the gospel. Right? And that's essentially how we approach that. Relational focus, help come alongside, whatever they need, and hopefully that gives us a chance to share the gospel. Which is ultimately what obviously why we do mission. So I would just encourage ministries, churches, to think more about along the lines of doing things in business to gain access to some like works for they do that already. They have to. I think next. So a couple of resources. These are just good books that I've used to kind of build this framework. I continue to read. If y'all have any suggestions for me, I'd love to read them. Those Faith Echo videos are amazing. They're really, really good. They're all about that, 5 to 7 minutes long. I use them in class all the time because that's the attention span nowadays. 5 to 7 minutes, not even, sometimes not 3.5 minutes. And so it gets us moving in class, like different things is what we do today. Next, I think that's it, actually. Yeah, that's it. Hey, thank you all. I'm really, really grateful for y'all being here, listening, engaging. If there's any way I can, if you want to connect with me in any way, then let me know. I have cards in the back. I can send you with a business card. We're always looking for just ways to build relationships with people, figure out different ways to apply our business knowledge, skills, and the like to help serve the kingdom and make the gospel and help people flourish, help people communities flourish. So that's our mission. And so thank you all so much for being here. If you have any questions afterwards,